Imagine having everything you've ever wanted. Wealth, power, admiration. You've built an empire from the ground up. But there's still one thing missing: an heir to carry on your legacy. Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments as you watch. For Will Carter, a self-made millionaire, the thought of dying without passing on his name haunted him. He believed that without children, his success would mean nothing. When his marriage crumbled, he convinced himself that he could live without the family he had always dreamed of. But years later, an unexpected encounter shatters everything he thought he knew about his past. What if the one thing he thought he had lost forever was still out there waiting for him? The truth is darker than he ever imagined. Will he be able to face the consequences of his choices and find redemption? Will Carter had everything he ever wanted. A towering empire built on years of a ruthless ambition and calculated decisions, a life of luxury with private jets, penthouses, and champagne toasts. The world admired him, envied him, and yet deep down something was always missing. His mother, the driving force behind the Carter legacy, never failed to remind him, "Legacy is everything, Will." Her voice as cold as the marble floors of their estate. What is all this wealth without someone to pass it to? The pressure was constant and suffocating. Will had conquered the business world, but now at 42, the haunting thought that he might not have an heir to pass his empire to gnawed at him. Family dinners, once pleasant gatherings, had become emotional battlefields. His mother, sharp and unforgiving, would corner him every time, her eyes hard with expectation. "Still no heir, son?" she would ask, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. It was unbearable. Will had tried to shrug it off, but the silent, unspoken judgment from his family, his colleagues, and his mother had begun to chip away at his resolve. And then there was Emily Carter. She had been his rock in the early days, his gentle strength when the world felt too harsh. Emily, with her warm smile and unwavering patience, had softened the cold edges of his ambition. She had been everything he wasn't: kind, empathetic, and grounded. But she couldn't give him what he needed most: a child. They had tried for years, dozens of doctors, endless treatments, medications, and consultations. The frustration of it all wore them both down. Emily's heartache was palpable, but Will's frustration began to fester into resentment. "Maybe it's just not meant to be," Emily said one quiet evening, sitting across from him at their grand dining table, the chandelier casting shadows over their faces. "Maybe we should just accept it." But Will couldn't accept that his empire, his legacy, would end with him. His dreams were too big and his goals too grand to be buried in the void of childlessness. For him, the idea of passing on his name, his power, and his success was the only thing that could make sense of it all. One evening, after weeks of avoidance and simmering frustration, Will decided the house felt like a tomb that night, the silence crushing. He watched Emily pour herself a glass of wine, her hands shaking ever so slightly. He knew this moment was coming, the moment that would change everything. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but cold, "I've thought about this long and hard. I can't go on like this. I need an heir." Her eyes met his, searching for a trace of compassion, some glimmer of hope. But Will's face was unreadable, his expression set in stone. "I can't keep waiting. I'm sorry, Emily," he continued, his words chilling as they left his lips. "I need someone who can give me a future. Someone who can carry on the Carter name." The word divorce hung in the air like a death sentence. Emily stared at him, her face pale, her lips trembling as if she were holding back tears. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him as if trying to see if any part of him still cared. But there was nothing. The man she loved, the man she had trusted, had already made up his mind. Without a word, she stood up and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty halls of their mansion. Will didn't chase her. He didn't even look back. He just sat there, a hollow man in a hollow house. The next few days were a blur. Emily packed her things in silence. There were no goodbyes, no last words, just a cold final silence. Will didn't even go to see her off. He buried himself in work, as if that could bury the guilt gnawing at him. But deep down, he knew he had destroyed everything that mattered. The house felt too big now, too empty. The walls seemed to mock him, reminding him that success, wealth, and power were nothing without someone to share them with. But it was too late. Emily was gone. The chance for a family, his family, was gone. The months that followed passed in a haze of board meetings, business deals, and hollow victories. Will's world was still perfect on the outside, but inside something was missing. He had everything, and nothing all at once. Then, one evening, just as Will was stepping out of a restaurant after a successful business dinner, something caught his eye. Across the street, under the glow of a dim streetlight, he saw her, Emily. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting on the curb, her hair disheveled and wearing a faded jacket. Beside her were two small children, two boys, laughing and playing with an old can. At first, Will thought it was just a trick of the light. But then, as he took a step forward, his heart stopped. The boys looked like him. Their eyes, their faces, their mannerisms, all of it screamed of him. The same shape of the jaw, the same mischievous glint in their eyes. Without thinking, Will crossed the street, ignoring the honking of a taxi that almost hit him. As he approached, Emily looked up. Her eyes, once full of warmth, were now hollow and tired. But she didn't seem shocked to see him. "You shouldn't be here, Will," she said, her voice tired and guarded. "It's not the right time." Will's heart raced as his mind struggled to catch up. "Who are they, Emily?" "Who are these kids?" His voice cracked. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, took the boys by the hand, and began to walk away, disappearing into the crowd. Will stood there, frozen, confusion and guilt consuming him. Do you think Will made the right decision by choosing his legacy over his marriage? Would you have done the same in his shoes? Will stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring after Emily and the two children as they vanished into the crowd. His mind raced, but his legs wouldn't move. The scene before him felt unreal, like a dream or a nightmare. He couldn't tell. His breath quickened as he tried to process what had just happened. Those children, were they mine? The thought echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. He had never even known Emily was pregnant, let alone that she had children. Yet there was no denying the striking resemblance between him and the two boys. Their eyes, their mannerisms, every little detail screamed of a connection, a blood tie that Will couldn't ignore. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally moved, crossing the street toward the corner where Emily had disappeared. But by the time he reached the spot, they were nowhere to be found. The next morning, Will couldn't shake the image of Emily and the two children from his mind. He couldn't focus on work. He couldn't bring himself to sign contracts or close deals. His thoughts consumed him with the mystery of those boys, his boys. He had to find out the truth. Without wasting any time, he hired a private investigator. His office became a flurry of phone calls, messages, and meetings. He needed answers. Were those children his? If they were, how had Emily kept them hidden from him all this time? Days turned into weeks as Will combed through Emily's life after their divorce. The investigator dug deep, tracing her steps and speaking to people who had crossed paths with her. It wasn't long before the investigator found something that made Will's heart drop into his stomach. Emily had faced a series of hardships after the divorce. She had lost her home shortly after leaving him, and her life had become a constant struggle. Will's own negligence and detachment from her situation hit him like a brick wall. He had ignored her pain, believing she would move on as if everything was fine, but it wasn't. The investigator uncovered something that sent a chill down Will's spine. Emily had received substantial financial assistance from a man named Ethan Matthews, a name Will recognized but hadn't thought much of. Ethan was someone from their past, an old acquaintance who had always kept a low profile. According to the investigation, Ethan had been there for Emily through thick and thin, providing financial support during her hardest times. Will wasn't sure what hurt more: the fact that Emily had been struggling alone, or the realization that another man had been there for her in ways he should have been. Will decided he needed to confront this to understand what had really happened, even if it meant unraveling all the lies he had built up in his mind. He found out where Ethan lived, a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of New York City. It was a far cry from Will's grand mansion in the heart of Manhattan, a world apart from the life Will had built for himself. After driving through the neighborhood and parking a block away, Will stood in front of Ethan's modest home. He hesitated for a moment before walking up the worn path to the door and knocking. Ethan answered after a few moments, his expression unreadable. Will stood before him, a mix of curiosity and anger bubbling inside him. "I need to talk to you," Will said, his voice tight. Ethan looked at him for a moment, his brow furrowing. "About what?" "I know you helped Emily. I know about the money you've sent her, and I need to know why," Will said, his words sharp. Ethan stepped back, motioning for him to come in. Will walked through the door into the small, modest house. The walls were lined with books and pictures of children, Will guessed. "You're right," Ethan said once they were both seated in the living room. "I helped her. She was in a bad place after you two split. She had no one else." "But that's not the reason I did it." Will narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Ethan looked at him with a mix of compassion and frustration. "I did it because I care about her. She's been through hell since you left her, Will, and I couldn't just stand by and watch her suffer. Especially not with those kids. She couldn't do it alone. No one was there for her." Will felt a pang of guilt shoot through him. "So you helped her because you wanted to be there for her?" he asked, his voice low. Ethan nodded. "Yes, but not just that. I've known Emily for years. She's a strong woman, but she's not perfect. She had her fears and her insecurities, and when she found out she was pregnant with those boys, she was terrified." "Why didn't she tell me?" Will asked, his voice rising slightly. "Why didn't she ever tell me about them?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Because she knew it would hurt you. She thought you'd just leave her again. She didn't think you could handle it, Will. You were so focused on your empire, on your legacy. She thought it was better for the kids to grow up without all that pressure." Will felt the weight of Ethan's words sink in. "So she kept them from me." "She didn't keep them from you. She protected them," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "She was trying to shield them from the world you were building, the world you were always so focused on." Will's head spun as everything began to click into place. He had never seen things from Emily's perspective. He had been so caught up in his own needs and desires that he never once considered what she might have been going through. And now, all of a sudden, the truth was out in the open. His world, once so solid and controlled, felt like it was collapsing. "Why didn't you tell me about the kids?" Will asked again, more urgently. "Do you know if they're mine?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "They're yours, Will. I never told you because Emily never wanted to hurt you, but the truth is, they're yours." The words hit Will harder than any deal, any contract, any financial victory ever had. His kids, the boys he had never known, the boys who were living in the shadows of his past, now stood in front of him, growing up without him. Will felt sick to his stomach. All these years, all the missed moments, and he had no idea. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "I need to find her," he said, determination settling into his voice. "I need to make things right." Ethan looked at him, his face somber. "It's not that simple, Will. It's not going to be easy for Emily to trust you again. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay." Will turned to him, his eyes blazing with the fire of someone who knew what was at stake. "I know," he said, his voice hard. "But I have to try. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you'll help us improve our content in the future. What would you do if you were Will? Would you have made the same decision to reconnect with your children after years of separation? How do you think Emily will react to his attempts to re-enter their lives?" After his conversation with Ethan Matthews, Will was more determined than ever. He knew that the road ahead would be rocky, filled with questions he couldn't yet answer and painful truths he might not be ready to face. But one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The boys were his, and they deserved to know him. Emily deserved to see him try to be better, to make things right, even if it meant shattering everything he had once believed about himself. Will didn't waste any more time. He hired another investigator, someone who could help him track Emily's every move, locate her and the children, and most importantly, figure out a way to convince her to let him be part of their lives. He couldn't sit in his grand Carter Hill estate anymore, surrounded by all the riches he had acquired, knowing that there were two little boys out there, his sons, who had grown up without him. Days passed, and Will grew more anxious with each hour. The investigator found that Emily had been living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the lavish lifestyle Will was accustomed to. It was a humbling revelation. The day came when the investigator finally called with a breakthrough. Emily was in Central Park with the kids. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Will drove there without hesitation, not caring about the looks of his expensive car or the attention it attracted. The only thing that mattered was seeing those boys and perhaps, just perhaps, getting a chance to be the father they deserved. Will arrived at the park and for the first time in his life didn't feel like the king of the world. The towering trees, the families picnicking on the grass, and the children laughing and playing all felt so ordinary. His eyes scanned the area looking for Emily and the boys. And there, sitting on a bench near the playground, he spotted them. Emily was sitting alone, the two boys running around in the grass, their laughter filling the air. Will stood there for a moment, watching them, his heart pounding. The boys looked so much like him, it almost hurt. They were his flesh and blood, and yet they had no idea who he was. They had never known him as their father. Taking a deep breath, Will approached cautiously, his steps hesitant. As he got closer, the boys noticed him. They stopped playing, their innocent eyes locking onto his. Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. "Emily," Will said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We need to talk." She didn't stand up. Instead, she looked at him, her face guarded. The boys stood beside her, watching Will with curiosity. Emily, though, had seen enough of Will's cold ambition to know not to trust him easily. She had every right not to. "You found us," Emily said quietly, her voice a mixture of resignation and caution. "I've been looking for you," Will admitted, his voice raw. "I need to be in their lives. They deserve to know me. I need to make up for everything I've missed." Emily's gaze softened slightly, but a wall remained between them, built from years of pain, neglect, and broken promises. "They don't need you, Will," she asserted firmly. "They've been fine without you. They've had me." "But they deserve more," Will countered. "They deserve a father. They deserve stability. Someone who will be there for them, someone who won't just leave them when things get tough." The words stung, and Will could see Emily's walls starting to crack. She had spent years protecting herself and her children from the pain he had caused, becoming a fortress. She had never given him the chance to make amends because, in her heart, she knew how much damage he could do. "And yet here I am asking for that chance," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to be the father they deserve, a chance to show them I can be better, a chance to make things right." Emily looked down at the boys standing silently beside her, their innocent eyes flickering between their mother and Will. Her heart broke at the thought of what her children had endured without their father. She had always been their only constant, their only protector. But maybe, just maybe, they could have more. After a long pause, Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "You can be part of their lives, but I won't let you do this halfway. If you want to be a father to them, you have to prove it. Every day, you have to show them they can trust you." Will nodded, his heart heavy but filled with determination. "I will. I promise." And so a new chapter began. Slowly, Will started spending time with the boys. At first it was awkward. They didn't know him. They didn't call him Dad. They barely knew what that word meant. But over time, Will showed up for every soccer game, every school recital, and every birthday. He learned how to be present, how to listen, how to be a father, not just a provider. There were moments of doubt, moments when Emily wasn't sure if this was the right decision. There were times when Will felt like giving up, when the old patterns of selfishness threatened to rear their heads again. But every time, he reminded himself why he was doing this, why he couldn't walk away again. Months passed, and the bond between Will and the boys grew stronger. They started calling him Dad. They ran to him with open arms when they saw him at the park. They asked him questions about his work, his past, and even his favorite childhood memories. Slowly, the gap between them began to close. One evening, as they sat together in the Carter Hill estate playing a game of chess, one of the boys, Max, the older twin, looked up at Will and asked, "Dad, do you think we'll be okay?" Will paused, his hand hovering over the chessboard. The question was simple, yet it cut to the core. It was a question that had no easy answer, but he knew what he had to say. "We'll be more than okay," Will said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll be better than okay. We'll be a family, and I won't let anything take that away from us." What do you think of Will's journey toward redemption? Do you believe he truly has changed, or is he only trying to fix his past mistakes for his own sake? How do you think Emily will feel as Will continues to prove himself to their children? Comment below with your thoughts. Also, where are you watching from? Let us know what country you're tuning in from, and don't forget to share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it.